So the next cooking tutorial for GAPS that I am going to be making is how to make your own homemade yogurt. Now, yogurt is it's an extremely healing food. Anything fermented is going to be extremely healing, but the yogurt you buy at the store is often like barely fermented. Sometimes they only ferment it for like 6, 7, 8 hours, which really isn't enough to be super therapeutic. Really, to have a really therapeutic ferment that has a really healing amount of probiotics in it, we want it to be fermented for at least 24 hours, and that's dairy. Fermented vegetables, we actually want to do it for much longer than that, which also the store-bought kind, you rarely see that. But when we're talking about dairy, we want at least 24 hours of fermentation, and most of the stuff you find in the store just doesn't do that. So you can buy store-bought already fermented dairy, and you can leave it out on your kitchen counter for a day or so, 12 hours, because at that point you probably cumulatively it has fermented for 24 hours now, because they probably at the company fermented it, you know, for 6, 8 hours, and then you fermented it for 12 or 24 hours, and then cumulatively you have had enough of a ferment. I really love this Bellwether Farms sheep yogurt. It's really delicious, and you can find it almost anywhere, which is really nice when I'm on the road and I'm looking for a good dairy product, fermented dairy product. But what I have done is I've left it out on the counter all day, so I'm going to eat this tomorrow, and it's going to be extra fermented. You can feel it's like the top is kind of bulging because it's been fermenting more all day, just at room temperature. So that's one way to deal with store-bought fermented dairy. The other thing you can do is just make your own, and it's going to be super powerful. It's going to be more powerful than any probiotic you could ever buy when you make it yourself. But you want to make sure that you get a good quality milk to start it with. Now, ideally, you want to find raw, grass-fed, pasture-raised dairy, right? And this could be cow, sheep, goat, whatever. But that is going to be the pinnacle of quality dairy that has the highest amounts of nutrients and is actually the most safe for consumption. When you are making a ferment with raw dairy, you don't have to heat it. You don't have to you can really just add a starter and let it ferment at room temperature, or at a little warmer, you can put it in the oven with the light on. But it really takes out an extra step. Because it already has good bacteria in it that are just waiting to proliferate. So you could inoculate it with another ferment. You could use a commercial starter. You could just let it wild ferment, which is called a clabber, where you just use the bacteria that's already in it and just let that proliferate. And you just leave it on your counter for 24 hours, and it's good to go. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have access to raw dairy. Although I do recommend you go on realmilk.com, because you might be surprised. There might actually be a dairy farm near you that you can get in touch with. That's a kind of what am I trying to say? It's a database of dairy farms that are doing raw dairy. So very, very simple to make a fermented dairy. If you have it raw, you just add a starter, you inoculate it from a previous one you've made, or you just let it wild ferment and clabber on its own. But if you need to use pasteurized dairy that you have bought from the store, there's a few things you want to look for. First of all, you want to make sure that it is full fat. You do not want to eat any dairy ever that is reduced fat, skim milk, low fat, whatever, because all the nutrients in the milk are in the fat. And so if we're taking the fat out, we're taking all the nutrition out. So yeah, you want to find a full fat, so a whole milk. And there's a few other things you want to look for. You want to look for grass-fed and organic, ideally, right? Because that's going to have the most, the least amount of like pesticides, toxins. The cows or whatever animal it was is going to have been eating its traditional diet. And so it's going to have the most nutrition and the lowest amount of toxins in it, if you can find that. The other thing you want to look for is non-homogenized. So homogenization is this bizarre method they use to make the milk look prettier. You might not be able to see this, but if you look really close, you can see kind of chunks of cream floating around in it, and they decided like that didn't look pretty or something, so they do this process where they basically like break down all the molecules of milk to make it all the cream and the protein like evenly distributed, and it's not good for the milk, and it's not good for you to be drinking milk in that form. So you want to make sure it's non-homogenized and you can see like the cream top, basically like chunks of cream or a layer of cream floating around in it, so that it doesn't look all uniform. The last thing you want to look for ideally is just a basic pasteurization label or a low temp pasteurization label. It is really popular nowadays, even with organic brands. You'll see it says ultra pasteurized. That is like the worst thing you can do. If you just do a low heat pasteurization, just, barely heated enough to kill the bacteria in it, it doesn't actually change the proteins in the milk. I mean, you're killing all the beneficial bacteria and enzymes, but it's not the worst thing in the world. If it's ultra pasteurized, that means they heated it to a really extreme temperature and actually started breaking down the proteins in the milk. And we just don't know what the effect of that is on the way our body assimilates those proteins. And so it's not a good idea to eat the ultra pasteurized milk. Or the ones that are fortified with things like vitamin D. The reason they have to fortify milk with vitamin D is because they have processed all the vitamins out of it. Dairy is actually one of the best food sources of vitamin D, just how it is already, right? That's why you see people in a lot of northern climates eating a lot of dairy over the winter, right? That they've fermented and stored, because that's how they're getting vitamin D when they have no sunlight, right? So dairy is one of the best sources of vitamin D, and we destroy it in the way we process it, and then we have to re-fortify it with vitamin D, and it's usually a synthetic form of vitamin D that our bodies don't absorb well. So you want to try to find as natural a source of milk as you can. Obviously, you may have to compromise on some of those things I just said, depending on what your access is, but just do your best. I like this Kelowna Supernatural brand. I can find it at a lot of places that I travel to, co-ops, sometimes Walmarts, not very often Walmart's, usually more like Whole Foods, Sprouts, things like that. And it's honestly the best quality milk I've really found in a grocery store for the most part, except those few states where I can find the local raw milk. There are a couple states like California and Arizona where I love being because they can sell the local raw dairy in grocery stores. But for the most part, this is going to be one of the best ones you can find. So, like I said before, if you are just making fermented dairy from raw, you don't have to heat it up because it has all the good beneficial bacteria in it already, so you just want to cultivate that, right? So you can add an extra starter, you can inoculate it with another yogurt or kefir, another ferment, or you can use a commercial starter that you buy online or like in a fermentation store or something like that. But if it has been pasteurized, even low temp pasteurized, you do have to re-pasteurize it yourself, because here's the thing, pasteurizing dairy actually makes it more dangerous. I know this is contrary to what a lot of people think, but when dairy is raw, it has a lot of really great, good probiotic bacteria in it that keep dangerous bacteria at bay. It's the same thing that happens in our microbiome, right? When we have a lot of good bacteria in our gut, it takes care of any infectious agents, right? It kills off any pathogenic or opportunistic pathogens that get into our body. When you pasteurize it, you kill off the good guys, right? And so now you have this empty landscape for really negative opportunistic bacteria to grow. So it's actually more dangerous. Many more people get sick and die from pasteurized dairy every year than raw dairy. So it's very an unfortunate situation we have in our food system right now. So if you're going to make a fermented dairy from a pasteurized dairy, you have to repasteurize it because you need to kill all the bacteria that has been growing in it while it's been sitting on the grocery store shelf since it was pasteurized the first time. So what you need for that is you need a pot and you need a thermometer, a cooking thermometer. All right, so I have my pot. And I have my milk. Actually, since it's not homogenized, I'm going to shake it up. Sugar, sugar, sugar. And I'm going to pour, ooh, wow, those are big creamy chunks. Nice. And I'm going to pour the milk in. I got my kitchen thermometer. And this is really helpful to make sure you're heating the dairy to the right amount to pasteurize it, another low heat pasteurization. You want to heat it to 160 to 180 Fahrenheit to pasteurize it. Oh, so this is already good. It's already at 180, so we are good. Basically, you want it to start kind of simmering without boiling. If you don't have access to a thermometer, I mean, obviously to be safe, that's ideal, but you know, some people do just do it by watching, and basically you want to get it to a heat where it is like, looks like it's about to simmer, like about to bubble, but not quite. That's like that golden spot. And then what we have to do is let it cool. We want it to get down to under 120, because that's going to be that's kind of like where you stop burning yourself when you are exposed to heat, and that means the bacteria won't die when it's exposed to that heat too. The temperature where you can stick your finger in something without burning yourself is the temperature that is safe for bacteria to proliferate. And so we just killed the bad bacteria that may have grown in this when it was sitting on the shelf in the grocery store being pasteurized, after being pasteurized. And so we just killed any bad bacteria, and so now we have to let it cool down enough that we can now inoculate it with good bacteria and create our own ferment. So that is going to take a minute to do. In the meantime, I'll show you how I'm going to do that. So there's a few ways to do it. One is, if you have made, this is like, you know, not your first time doing this, you probably have some yogurt that you've already made in the fridge, and you can take 1/3 of a cup of that, and once this is the right temperature, you can add it to that and stir it in. You can get a commercial ferment that is, you know, unsweetened, full fat, organic, ideally, right? No thickeners, no additives. The only ingredients should be the dairy, so the whole milk, and the cultures, the probiotics, and often they will list the bacteria strains they put in. If there are any gums, any starches, any flavorings, anything added to it, any sweeteners, no good. And unfortunately, most of the ones you find at like very conventional grocery stores are going to have that stuff in it. So you really need to look at ingredients list, even if the label looks really nice and has like a happy cow on it and a green pasture and all this kind of stuff. You cannot trust advertising, kids. You have to turn it over. You have to look at the ingredients. This is one I can find at most stores. It's the Maple Hill brand. Unfortunately, their milk is ultra pasteurized, but they do seem to have decent ferments. And so their only ingredients in their unsweetened plain one is just whole milk and the probiotics. So so this is a go-to. Now, I am going to inoculate with kefir, and I do want to talk a little bit about the difference between yogurt and kefir. They're just different types of bacteria. So it's all going to make a fermented dairy product, but yogurt, like the bacteria that make yogurt, are different than the bacteria that make kefir. Kefir is, excuse me, a very ancient traditional strain of bacteria. It's been cultivated for a long time. It is particularly strong and powerful. Kefir is probably one of the most therapeutic types of probiotic foods out there. And you can do kefir water, you know, you can do kefir dairy. I've seen kefir coconut milk even. Like you can inoculate anything with it. But you're most often going to see it in dairy form. And because kefir is so strong as a probiotic, it's often not what I recommend people start with when they start bringing fermented foods into their diet after they've been healing their gut. Usually I suggest that people actually start with yogurt. And so you might use something like this Bellwether Farms sheep yogurt or something like that, or another brand of yogurt you find that is very clean, very plain. And basically you use 1/3 of a cup. Once this is under 120 degrees, ideally maybe more like 110, you're going to put 1/3 of a cup into that, and you're going to mix it in. And then what you're going to do is you're going to put it in our trusty mason jars, which are so multi-purpose, and you are going to just set it on the counter and let it ferment for 24 hours at the minimum. The longer you let it go, the more sour it will get, and the more strong the probiotic will be. So when you're first starting out, you definitely don't want to go more than 24 hours, but if you're really getting next level with it, you could let it go longer. I've had them go 24 hours, or sorry, 48 hours before, but I've been doing this a long time, so I can handle a very high amount of probiotics at this point without a negative effect. And again, because I am at a higher stage of healing, I am going to use kefir as my culture. And that's, you know, what ideally you should aim for, being able to do some days. It's the most therapeutic, but you may not want to start with that. Alrighty, so that is my yogurt tutorial.